So what do you have to say to the relatives of Miss Chen about these charges? Mr. Dawson, do you have any messages at all for Christe's family? Mr. Dawson, why did you leave her?
On July 9th, 2022, around 1 in the afternoon, the resort butler made his way toward the private suite of the newlywed couple Christe and Bradley. It was his third visit that day. The first had been at 7 in the morning, then again at 10. Now it was past noon. Each time he approached the door, he was met with the same sign hanging outside. Do not disturb. Something was wrong. He could feel it. On an island paradise like Turtle Island Resort in Fiji, one of the most exclusive retreats in the world where a single night costs upwards of $3,500, the guests expected perfection. But this felt different. The unease settled into his chest as he stepped back from the door. He was their private butler, also known as the House Papa, a trusted presence at the resort. He had seen countless couples arrive, glowing with joy. He had watched love stories unfold in the turquoise embrace of the ocean breeze. But sometimes things shifted, and when they did, you could feel it. The butler retrieved the spare key. He hesitated only for a moment before sliding it into the lock. The suite was pristine. The bed remained perfectly made, crisp, untouched, as though no one had slept in it the night before. The air felt still and heavy. His eyes swept across the room until they landed on something small but jarring. A dark red smear on the ceramic tiles leading to the bathroom. He followed it. Pushing open the bathroom door, the butler froze. Christe was there. Her body was wedged tightly between the toilet and the wall. Her eyes were swollen. Her skin bore marks and bruises. Her right arm was discolored from wrist to shoulder. There were injuries on her head, on her body. The lid of the toilet tank was shattered beside her. The butler gasped. His hands shook as he stumbled backward. The vibrant life that had filled her eyes only days before was gone. Now there was only silence. He scrambled toward the phone. His fingers fumbled over the buttons as he called the resort's management. Within moments, the staff arrived. Their faces shifted from concern to shock as they took in the scene. The authorities were summoned. What began as a dream honeymoon had now unraveled into a devastating tragedy. The investigation into what truly happened to Christe Chen Dawson had just begun. Investigators began piecing together the chilling puzzle behind what had turned a young bride's dream honeymoon into a nightmare. Their first focus was her husband, Bradley Robert Dawson, but he was nowhere to be found. Inside the suite, his clothes were still there. His phone lay on the nightstand and his smartwatch too. But there was no sign of him. Had he been taken? Forced away by whoever had harmed his wife? That theory was short-lived. His wallet and passport were missing. Detectives checked Christe's purse. No cash. No credit cards. It was almost as if someone had taken what mattered but left every device that could be traced. While part of the team scoured the suite, others spoke with resort staff and nearby guests hoping for a glimpse into what happened that night. A man staying in the bungalow next door shared what he had heard and seen. It was July 8th, 2022. The couple had only arrived the day before. Their happiness was impossible to miss. Laughter, music, glasses clinking. They celebrated with drinks, the kind of joy that turns heads. But as the night wore on, something shifted. Bradley kept drinking a lot. His laughter grew louder, but his movements became unsteady. Christe whispered to him, gently at first, then more firmly. She was asking him to stop, but he didn't. Instead, he danced harder, held her closer, kept pouring more. Guests started noticing. The charm was slipping. Bradley was losing control. Then came the moment no one missed. He approached another woman, someone staying at the resort, and tried to speak with her in a way that felt too wrong, all while Christe stood beside him. Embarrassment flared in her eyes. She pulled him away sternly. Together they stepped toward their private beach, but their whispers turned into raised voices. Those nearby heard them arguing. Bradley's words slurred, Christe's tone sharp. Their voices carried over the gentle waves. The argument dragged on. Later, back at the bungalow, the neighbors heard more. Loud shouting, heavy thuds against the walls. Then a final sound. A single forceful crash. And after that, complete and heavy silence. The kind that lingers long after the damage is done. The initial investigation lasted about 4 hours. By 6 p.m. Fiji time, the authorities there made the call they needed to contact their counterparts in the United States. Once the authorities in the U.S. were informed, the most difficult task remained: telling Christe's parents. There was no time to wait, even though it was around 12:30 after midnight back home. The phone rang. Christe's mother, Xiaowei Liu, answered. What she heard was like a thunderbolt crashing into her heart. Her only daughter, 36 years old, on her honeymoon with her husband, was gone. In disbelief, her hands shaking, she passed the phone to Christe's father, Tao Chen. He needed to hear it for himself, needed to confirm the unthinkable. The officer's voice was steady but firm. Their daughter had lost her life after a violent incident, and her husband Bradley was missing. The parents were frozen in shock, refusing to accept the truth. Their only child, the light of their lives, was taken from them. Through tears and trembling voices, they quickly arranged their journey to Fiji. They needed to be by their daughter's side, to bring her home, to lay her to rest in the family's burial plot, or so they thought. The flight took 24 hours, every minute filled with grief and disbelief. But during those same 24 hours, the investigation took a sharp turn. Detectives reviewed security footage from the Turtle Island resort. What they found changed everything. Bradley Dawson had not vanished into thin air. He had taken a kayak and paddled away from Turtle Island, heading toward a nearby island called Matakawalevu. When Christe's parents finally arrived in Fiji, exhausted and heartbroken, they went straight to meet with investigators. But as they were being updated, new information came in. A local man named Manoa Ratulele, 49 years old, who lived on Matakawalevu Island, had contacted authorities. He had been startled in the early hours of July 9th. A man, disheveled, exhausted, had knocked on his door. He looked like someone from the nearby resort island, someone from wealth. But his condition told a different story. His clothes were damp, his body worn, and he kept repeating the same phrase over and over. We had a fight and he asked Manoa to call the police. Detectives moved quickly. They traveled to Matakawalevu Island, and there they found him, Bradley Dawson, 38 years old. He was taken into custody. Manoa described that night in detail. In the early morning, he had seen a pale man arriving in a kayak from the direction of Turtle Island, a distance of about 1.5 miles across the water. Manoa had been surprised. Visitors from the wealthy resort island almost never crossed over to his modest home. His island was more familiar to backpackers and budget travelers, but this man was different. Following the kindness that runs deep in the hearts of Fijian islanders, Manoa offered him food, water, and a place to rest. But the man refused everything. He only wanted one thing: to call the police. Manoa noticed the smell of alcohol on him. He also saw the man's injured hand, his palm swollen and scratched. But what stuck with Manoa the most was the man's words. He kept repeating them, over and over. We had a fight. We had a fight. As if saying it out loud might erase what had already happened. The day after news of Christe's loss reached authorities, it began to quietly spread among her friends. At first, no one believed it. Everyone thought there must be some mistake. Her closest friend, Rena Schomburg, was the first to deny what she had heard. A message came through their group chat. The kind of message that makes your heart race before you even finish reading. Rena refused to believe it. She asked her husband to check. Minutes later, her world collapsed. It was true. The friend she had known and loved since 2015 was gone. The weight of the news hit Rena Schomburg like nothing she had ever felt before. Christe was not just a friend. She was like a sister. Someone so kind. So full of life. The idea that her story could end this way felt impossible. While Rena was trying to process her grief, the story was already making its way to local media. A young bride, a honeymoon in paradise, a life cut short. Reporters started digging. Who was Christe? Who was the man she married? Naturally, Rena became the voice who painted the picture of Christe's life. Her name was Christe Chen Dawson. She had once run a bakery in Colorado. Mornings there were filled with the smell of fresh bread and laughter. Christe was the kind of person who would feed her friends before they even thought about being hungry. Generosity was part of who she was. Later, she shifted paths. She studied pharmacy at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center and became a pharmacist. But success had not changed her. She was still the same person. The one who made desserts for friends just because. The one who brightened rooms with her energy. She was kind. She loved helping others. She was generous. She was social. She made everyone feel welcome, Rena said. Christe loved her mother deeply. Their trips together were legendary among friends. Luxury hotels, sunny beaches, photos filled with smiles. Then came Bradley, a man she met at a marathon event. He worked as an IT professional for Youth Villages, a non-profit organization helping young people. Their story moved fast. They met in November 2021. By February 2022, they were married. 3 months. People whispered that it was too quick. Bradley had just finalized his divorce a month before their wedding, but he told anyone who asked Christe was his forever. He had found real love. He would not waste another moment without her. Christe believed him. She had waited for someone who would make her feel this safe, this loved, this chosen. Their wedding was simple, just 20 guests. After that, they moved into their first home. A house in the Cooper Young neighborhood of Memphis, Tennessee, valued at $250,000. Christe was in her element. She made friends with the neighbors faster than anyone thought possible. She made that house a home. Then came the honeymoon. There were ideas, Europe, Japan, maybe somewhere close. But Bradley had already made up his mind. He wanted Turtle Island in Fiji. Christe thought it was just a dream at first. But Bradley wasn't dreaming. He was determined. He showed her the photos on his phone. Palm trees leaning over white sand. Clear water so blue it didn't look real. He told her it was a private island. 500 acres of paradise. No crowds, no noise. Just 14 couples at a time. He said they would have their own personal butler. Someone called a house papa. That person would plan everything for them. Private boat trips, snorkeling, horseback riding, spa treatments by the ocean, candlelit dinners on the beach. He told her it wasn't just a resort. It was the island where Blue Lagoon was filmed, a place where people went to feel like they were the only two souls on Earth. Christe hesitated. The cost was $3,500 per night, and they had just bought their home. When Christe told her parents about how Bradley crazy about their honeymoon trip to this island, they took care of the trip expenses as a special honeymoon gift. This would be it, the perfect beginning to their life together. In the end, Christe said yes. She trusted him. She believed in their future. What she did not know was that this trip would not be the start of their story. It would be the end. As the media uncovered more details about Christe's life and the whirlwind romance that led to her marriage with Bradley, public attention shifted back toward Fiji. Everyone wanted to know, how was the investigation progressing? The initial results from Bradley's questioning painted a bleak picture. He admitted there had been a heated argument that night. He confessed to striking Christe and leaving her lifeless before fleeing the scene. He said he had been heavily intoxicated. He claimed he did not know what he was doing. But there was something Bradley left out. Something deeper. Something that had ignited the tension long before that final night. A reason no one expected. Bradley had insisted on Turtle Island from the beginning. He made it sound like the perfect place to start their new life. But what Christe did not know, what she only discovered after arriving, was that Bradley had already been to this island before. Not with her, with his former wife. The resort staff recognized him the moment he arrived. They remembered him. This was not his first honeymoon on Turtle Island. For Christe, it was like the ground beneath her shifted. The man who had spent months convincing her that this island was their paradise was not creating a new beginning. He was chasing the past. The romantic getaway she believed was theirs alone was, in reality, a place filled with his memories with another woman. To make matters worse, the entire trip, the one he fought for so passionately, had been paid for by Christe's parents. The people who loved her the most had unknowingly funded a return to the setting of his previous marriage. That revelation cracked something inside Christe. And it didn't stop there. On the night of July 9th, witnesses saw Bradley drinking excessively at the resort party. He flirted with another woman, right in front of Christe. It was as though every piece of her new life was falling apart in a single night. The man she had trusted. The man she married after only 3 months. The man she thought was her future. Did she know him at all? Doubt crept in. Regret followed closely behind. Christe began to wonder, had she rushed into this? Had she overlooked who Bradley truly was? As these details surfaced, people demanded to know more. Who was his former wife? What led to their separation? Though her name was not made public, reports revealed that their marriage ended because Bradley had been controlling. And when he drank, he became someone else entirely. This wasn't just a rumor. Another woman from his past came forward. Kristen Baker, who had dated Bradley for a year during their time at the University of Tennessee, shared her experience. He could be charming, but when he drinks, he becomes someone else, she said. A different man. A darker side. The question began to haunt everyone following the case. Was Bradley simply a man who made terrible mistakes? Choosing the wrong honeymoon destination? Drinking too much? Letting his anger get the better of him? Or was he something else entirely? Someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Someone who had played on the kindness and warmth of a woman like Christe. Someone who gave him everything, only to betray her in the cruelest way. The truth was still buried in the investigation files in Fiji. But as more details surfaced, one thing became clear. This was not just a tragedy. This was a story where every new fact made the ending even more unsettling. What happened inside that suite between Bradley and Christe? Only the two of them knew. But investigators were determined to uncover the truth. The first step was the medical examination report. The results left no room for doubt. Christe had lost her life due to a severe brain injury. There was internal bleeding in her head. The injuries were the result of blunt force impacts to her skull. And it did not stop there. Her body carried signs of trauma across multiple areas. Bruises, impact marks. Signs of a struggle that had lasted more than a few fleeting moments. This was not a brief outburst fueled by alcohol. This was prolonged, violent. Investigators knew it. The pattern of injuries painted a clear picture. What happened to Christe took time. It was not a mistake. It was sustained aggression. And what followed after that night only confirmed their suspicions. Bradley had claimed he was too intoxicated to know right from wrong, but his actions told a different story. Investigators noted that Bradley had been clear-headed enough to gather cash and credit cards before leaving the suite. He deliberately left behind every smart device, anything that could be traced. Then came the most damning detail. He stole a kayak and paddled across open waters nearly 1.5 miles to Matakawalevu Island, where he was later found. That was not the behavior of a man who had lost control. That was someone trying to get away. Someone thinking through their next steps. Someone avoiding the consequences. When officers detained him, he refused to provide a DNA sample. Every decision he made after that night led investigators to the same conclusion. This was not just a tragic mistake. This was a man trying to escape what he had done. But while the authorities built their case, Bradley's defense fought back. Iqbal Khan, his lawyer, was by his side from the start. He stood before the press, firm in his message his client was innocent. When Bradley was first detained, the lawyer described him as deeply shaken. He said his client was so distressed he could barely speak for days. He challenged the request for a DNA sample, arguing that such an order could only come from the High Court. It was a legal battle, a war of narratives. But for Christe's family, this was not about legal arguments. It was about bringing their daughter home. They hired Ronald Gordon, a lawyer in Fiji, to monitor the investigation and begin the process of returning Christe's body to the United States. But nothing prepared them for what happened next. Their request was denied. The authorities explained why. Christe's body was too severely damaged. The condition made it impossible to transport her remains. The words hit her parents like a second tragedy. They were left with a choice no parent should ever face. To see their daughter return home meant they would have to cremate her. And so they agreed. With hearts broken beyond repair, they made the decision to have their only child reduced to ashes so she could finally rest in the country she called home. After a long period of investigations, paperwork, and legal procedures, Bradley Robert Dawson was officially charged on December 11, 2024, with intentionally causing the loss of his wife, Christe Chen Dawson. By early February 2025, the trial began. The setting was the Lautoka High Court in Fiji. The trial stretched over 8 tense days. The prosecution presented their case with precision. Their goal was clear: to prove that what happened on the night of July 9, 2022 was not the result of an alcohol-fueled accident. It was a deliberate act. The evidence was laid out in detail. First, the severity and number of Christe's injuries. Second, Bradley's calculated escape using the kayak to paddle over 1.5 miles to a neighboring island. Third, his decision to leave behind all traceable devices. Finally, taking his passport, cash, and credit cards, clear signs of a man trying to disappear. The prosecution argued that these were not the actions of a man who lost control in a drunken mistake. These were the choices of someone running from what he had done. But the defense had a different story. They painted Bradley as a husband devastated by a heated argument that spiraled out of control under the influence of alcohol. The defense lawyer insisted his client had not meant for this to happen. He pointed to one key moment as proof of Bradley's remorse. After reaching the island, Bradley had asked the local resident to call the authorities. He could have disappeared into the islands, but he chose not to. That, the defense argued, showed he never intended to flee. On February 9, 2025, the courtroom fell silent. Justice Riaz Hamza prepared to deliver the verdict. The judge's words were firm and clear, and said that what should have been a truly joyous and memorable vacation was turned into a nightmare for the deceased and her family, causing much pain and sorrow to them. The court rejected Bradley's claim that it was an accident. Justice Hamza ruled that Bradley's actions after the incident, leaving the scene instead of seeking help, combined with the violent nature of Christe's injuries, proved intent. Bradley Robert Dawson was sentenced to a minimum of 18 years in prison before being eligible for pardon.
Thank you. Do you have any comments at all to make? I'm reporting for US Media. So what do you have to say to the relatives of Ms. Chen about these charges? Mr. Dawson, do you have any messages at all for Christe's family? Mr. Dawson, why did you leave her?
After hearing his fate, Bradley made a call to the media. He expressed his regret for what had happened. He insisted that it was never meant to happen. He said he prayed for Christe every day. And he still could not believe that the woman he was supposed to spend his life with was gone, and that he was the reason. Now the question remains: was Bradley a loving husband who lost control in a drunken rage, or was this something far darker? Let us know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. See you in the next video.